This is a public service announcement. We want to keep Culture Lab available to our subscribers for free. If you're interested in sponsoring the show, email us at contact@airquotesmedia.com.
That's right. It's contact@airquotesmedia.com. On with the show.
Welcome to the Culture Lab.
Welcome to the Culture Lab. I'm Kyla Ronellenfitsch.
And I'm Gabe Roche. This week in the lab, the data's back. Results are in.
State of the world.
Risk everywhere.
The boardroom's reaction.
Kiss the ring.
Under the microscope today, our loaded question: is America making offers nobody can refuse?
Is America making offers nobody can refuse? Huh? Not bad.
Very good. You're getting better each time.
Oh, you're a peek behind the curtain that we didn't get that right on the first take. But now it's perfect. So we're going on. Do we dive into the data and we speak with Gerald Butts, Vice Chairman of the Eurasia Group and advisor to Prime Ministers and CEOs.
We get into why, in a time of tremendous Trump-driven political instability, the business community has barely blinked. We'll also spend some time chatting Canadian politics and the contrasting Poilievre-Carney approach when it comes to the U.S.
Let's dig in.
Let us.
Kyla, either you've redecorated your office once again, or you're somewhere with kind of a nautical theme. What's going on here?
Yeah, I'm in Mexico. I'm on the Cancun side, so I'm rest assured. But I'm taking a little vacation.
All right, interesting timing. So expanding your business to reputation management for the cartels.
Yes, yeah. You've caught me. This is, also this doubles as a business announcement. So, but as you can see, in the almost a week since I've been here, travel advisories are gone, peace is restored. So it turns out, that the cartels are very responsive to public opinion. So I just let them know that actually it's not good to be terrorizing Puerto Vallarta, and they should stop, and they stopped. So you're welcome.
Puerto Vallarta. Well, like the NDP, I hope everyone's safe, especially the 2S LGBTIQA plus community, and especially the gay guy influencers in their Speedos.
I mean, these are important things. Obviously, thoughts and prayers. As you could tell by our last podcast, these are important things to us.
Yes, especially important. Well, okay, now that you've solved all the problems, I assume that you're like 14 margaritas deep.
Yeah, well, today I knew that we were recording, so today's drink was pina coladas, which is basically a smoothie. Like that is a health drink. So, I'm feeling great. I'm ready to laugh at everything that you say. If you catch me slurring, no, you didn't. Just mind your business, and we'll move on.
Okay, well, I have poured some mezcal to catch up with you, and I will.
Oh wow, a solidarity shot. I'm just overwhelmed.
Yes, well, clearly we're in a race against time, so let's hop into our topic du jour. Now, I caught some flack for saying raison d'être last week, to my great shame. So let me repeat: du jour.
Oh wow, I'm so. I feel like I've been romanced. It's so good.
Ooh, yeah. No,
so many languages on this podcast.
All the voices, all the accents. That's the kind of podcast we are now. Today's loaded question. We're going full Godfather. We're asking, is America making offers nobody can refuse? I didn't do the voice that time. But Kyla, why are we talking about this?
Yeah, I think that, we could describe 2026 primarily for worse, but as a very kind of cinematic year. And by cinematic, I mean of the apocalyptic. Did I pronounce that right? Sure, we'll go with it. More. It's giving more end of the world than like hero's journey. We're seeing, the Americans are swooping in and capturing dictators. They're taking out Iran's leadership. They're going after political opponents in the courts. Soldiers are literally in American streets. And on top of that, they're using AI, they're using Skynet or Anthropic to bomb other nations. So yeah, it's feeling very, made for TV, maybe even made for the big screen.
Yeah, although with a movie, it's nice to be able to leave at the end when it's over. It's nice that it is over eventually.
Yeah, well, alas.
We'll see. But this environment of risk, of these apocalyptic vibes, we've been spending a lot of time with the Eurasia Group's top risks of 2026 report. Very much feels like it's capturing this really dramatic moment, though using language that really makes it legible to political and business groups. Some of the top risks that we're going to talk about today that they identified, these are their headlines: the U.S. revolution, the Donroe Doctrine, Europe under siege, AI eats its users, zombie USMCA, or KUSMA, because we're a Canadian podcast.
Right.
These headlines sound a lot more like descriptors for movies pulled from IMDb than the pages of a consulting firm's report.
Yeah, and reading this report, obviously this is not their own interpretation; it's our own little flair. But what you can read under the surface is so much of what we're seeing, of what's baked into these global risks, is really just Trump's kind of basic mobster-like personality. Trump, he loves a loyalty test. He loves both quiet and explicit threats.
Yeah, donations to the inauguration, the ballroom, the FIFA Peace Prize, pro bono work from big law, giving up equity or a share of foreign revenue, a shower of golden gifts, a sculpture from Apple, or Rolex from the Swiss.
Just keep going.
Pleasing the king. Yeah, we won't pause on that. Pleasing the king or the capo hasn't really needed to be a core strategy for the business community in the United States, though, of course, some multinationals might be a little more used to it in authoritarian markets and states. But looking back to Trump's first term, we saw a pretty widespread uprising of oppositional forces that cut across many sectors of society, including business, right? Many companies reacted with horror to the Muslim immigration ban in the early first term. Getting toward the end of the term, social media companies were suspending his account, right? These are business, the business community stepping up in a way with a voice of opposition. Now, in the second term, you've got protests in areas with ICE deployments, troubling political violence. Civil society is responding to the kind of upheaval, but many of the most powerful institutions have been compliant. That's going to be a core part of our conversation with Jerry, but what are the strategic trade-offs when it comes to confronting the risks of interacting with a mob boss or a mad king?
Yeah, I feel like when I watch this scenario, I obviously look at a lot of, public affairs issues, look at political issues, look at business stories. As a pollster, I can't help it. I think of things through the lens of public opinion. And, both you and I, we get hired by businesses to translate what the public thinks into a recommendation for their business. Obviously, not every business decision is fueled by public appetites and what the public thinks. And also not all companies kind of operate in this way where they care what the public thinks. But when I look at how business has reacted to Trump, like again, through my pollster brain, every time I'm just like, why are they doing this? It feels so out of step with where the public's at. So, Trump he's just not a particularly popular president. We like to think because his popularity, his rising has felt so, I think, odd in lots of ways, and especially among kind of like elite consensus, it has felt like it came out of nowhere, that we all seem to kind of doubt and overstate his popularity. But the reality is that just 42% in Nate Silver's aggregations, 42% of Americans approve of the job that he's doing. That is like pretty much historically low. There's been a few instances that have been lower, but it's almost as bad as it gets in an American environment that is very polarized. If we look at specific examples, specific things that the business community has propped up, opposition outweighs support by a 2-to-1 margin for helping to fund his for his ballroom. But even when it comes to his strengths, like things like immigration, things like handling the economy, he's also underwater on management of both of those issues. Like, I again kind of look at this situation where the business community has been kind of rolling over for Trump, and just question why they have been so willing and so ready to give up their own very substantial, like we're talking about American capitalism. They're so willing to give up their own power for a president who is not particularly popular and not doing particularly popular things.
Look, these are businesses who eventually will have to exist in a market or an environment, a world where Trump isn't in power, whether that's under President Vance or Rubio or a President Newsom or AOC. And that is a strategic calculation that they have to make. And I think we've been seeing them fall on a particular side of that calculation. But it's a risky calculation. And to help guide us through some of these risks, we're talking to Gerry Butts in the lab today. He's going to walk us through this fundamental question about the trade-offs between compliance, encouragement, strategic opposition, kissing the ring, or taking any kind of stand. There are very few Canadians who can speak with more authority about these strategic calculations at both the political and the business levels. He's someone who's been deeply involved in politics and is now an advisor to boards, CEOs, and governments on these very existential threats.
Welcome to the Culture Lab.
I'm really excited to dig into our loaded question, is America making offers nobody can refuse, with Gerry Butts. Gerry is the vice chairman at Eurasia Group, where he helps business leaders navigate global political risks. To our audience, he's probably better known as one of the most influential political strategists of the modern liberal era. He has twice held one of the most powerful staff roles in Canadian politics, serving as the principal secretary to Ontario Premier Dalton McGuinty and later to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And he is a key advisor to Prime Minister Carney. In the spirit of transparency, I'll say we also worked together on last year's federal campaign. So Gerry, welcome to the show. We're really excited for this conversation.
Oh, I'm thrilled to be here, and congrats on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Like a true leftist talking about Trump, I'm going to start from a position of insecurity. Our loaded question, it basically infers that we're now living in mobster geopolitics. Are we being hysterical, or are we now living in an age where the fundamental strategic goal is basically avoiding getting whacked? So whether that's, trying to avoid new tariffs or, the deeming of an American company as a supply chain risk. Like, is this what we're trying to do? Is avoid Donald Trump's wrath?
Yeah, well, I don't think that's far from the truth, Kyla. I think in the first Trump term, we would joke that all we really wanted to do was make sure the eye of Sauron was pointed somewhere else. Whereas in this term, we've developed what we thought was a kind of funny heuristic at Eurasia Group, but our clients have really responded to it. We call it the FAFO to TACO continuum, which is you have to decide whether you're at one end of the spectrum or the other in terms of the way the President of the United States evaluates your ability to cause him harm. And if you're on the FAFO end, which I think Venezuela is definitely on that end, Trump believes that Iran is at that end of the spectrum. We'll see. It's early days in that conflict. And then at the far other end, you have countries probably alone. The one country that's at the far end by itself is China. So yeah, I think your heuristic is pretty true. I think if Trump is a bully and he feels like if he's got leverage over you, he will use it until you either squeal and give him what he wants, or you show him that his energy is best directed elsewhere.
I feel like government is always so rich with acronyms, but who knew that we'd be in a world of, FAFO to taco. It's really,
Do you guys swear as much as the other podcasts on this under this
we
umbrella?
Probably don't, but I'm not averse.
Yeah, we have the little explicit warning on the in the podcast app, so we're good. We can curse. So Kyla started with a question about Trump, and I'm going to do the same. And it's also where you start in the report on the global risks. But Trump is a major through line throughout a lot of these risks. Trump-led destabilization, if I can summarize it that way. I want to start with the first risk, American political revolution. I'm immersed in that, living and working in California for the past couple of years, but so are Canadians, of course. They're sleeping next to an elephant, feeling every twitch, grunt, and implosion. Is it possible, I think, we can look at the different Trump actions. We can think of them as one-off examples of erosion. In the report, you declare that the United States is experiencing a political revolution. Yeah. How did those one-off actions fit together?
An attempted political revolution. I think what part of the People's Republic of California are you in?
Well, I'm in Santa Barbara with
nice.
Prince Harry and Meghan and Oprah and all the celebrities that make it unaffordable to live here. But yeah.
Yeah, well, listen, I think the reason I ask is because California's relationship to the rest of the country is kind of the underlying point about Trump, that Dave Cochran will love it when I mention the fact that I agree with him, because it makes the tin hat right wing crowd even more conspiratorial in Canada. But I thought he said something really smart on CBC earlier this year when he said that Donald Trump is president of the United States because the United States is the way it is, not the other way around. I think that's a really important learning for people who live in the United States and those of us who happen to be neighbors of the United States. I think in the first Trump term, there was this hope that Trump would be succeeded by somebody, quote unquote, like a normie, and all of this would go away. And our analysis is that the core problem in the U.S. is that half of Americans hate the other half of Americans, and each thinks the other is a bigger threat to the country than anyone outside of the country. And as long as that structural polarity maintains itself, then it's going to be up to 250,000 people every 4 years to tell us which version of the United States the rest of us have to live with. And I think that is the core problem in the U.S.
Yeah, to me, in reading the report, one of the things that I found to be so interesting is it was kind of doing the thing that we talk about in politics all the time, which is just saying the thing. It was explicit in a lot of its analysis. And I think for both Trump 1 and 2, we hear so much reporting about this kind of discrepancy between, this person, these politicians or these business leaders, they will talk about Trump in one way behind closed doors and a different way out in public. I'm just curious in the bluntness of this report, what that reaction has been. Has there been a surprise in some of when you were talking to maybe we won't say your clients, when you're talking to the business community,
sure,
and the bluntness, or people looking at this and kind of nodding that this feels about right, even if they're not saying it as such out in the world?
I think, I don't want to sound self-congratulatory about Eurasia Group here, but I think that's on brand for us, Kyla, that we like to think of ourselves as people who are nonpartisan in the extreme, almost to a fault, and we call balls and strikes the way we see them, and we're always open to people telling us we're wrong and for fact-based rationales on why we're wrong, and we're open to alternative arguments. Goodness knows we have lots of people within the firm who we have a really robust debate about what's going to be in the top risks report. It's definitely a whole firm exercise, and it's one of the most fun things we do. A lot of the stuff we do is behind closed doors, and it's private advisory to clients, and you don't really get to see it. This is sort of the 1/10 of the iceberg that pops above the waves every year, so we really put a lot of thought into it. And I would characterize it sort of, I said this in reaction to, well, when people were asking me about the reaction to Prime Minister Carney's speech in Davos. I think that he said out loud what many people are saying to each other behind closed doors, but nobody of stature with a real global platform had said it. And after he said it, it gave people license to talk about it, and more importantly, to plan for its reality than had existed in the past. And that's, in a much more modest way, the way we conceive of our role at Eurasia Group. It's not to be encumbered by our political views, but to see the world as clearly as we can, the way it is, and say these are the things that are likely to materialize as problems if you're an investor or if you're a company that has a large global supply chain. And our track record's pretty good, right? And I think that most people read our report every January and they say, yeah, I wouldn't have put it that bluntly, but I can see where they're coming from. And I think that the key point that you're both asking in the question is, how did we go from a world where the United States was the world's most important shock absorber of political risk, which is what it has been. You guys are younger than me. I'm a proud Gen Xer. That was the first 30 years of my life, right? 35, 40 years of my life. And now the United States is probably the most important generator of geopolitical risk. Like, I had a call with a client yesterday who said, it's interesting, you guys didn't mention Iran in your top 10 lists. And it's like, well, this risk isn't about Iran. It's about the United States, right? It's about Donald Trump, and it's about the revolution that he's trying to conduct within the American political system. It's just yet another example of him being able to extraordinarily break norms that would probably kill another president.
So it's an attempted revolution. I think that's
yes.
You made that clear. And in the report, you say it's a revolution that's ultimately more likely to fail than to succeed. But you also make the point there's no going back to the status quo ante.
Yeah.
If a revolution fails, the damage is permanent. Help me think through the functional difference between a failed revolution and, like, if Trump were successful in this revolution.
Well, if Trump were successful, he would permanently install himself, his family, his chosen successors as recognized rulers of the United States. And we don't think that's likely to happen. But the United States political institutions, which I think people overestimated how stable and strong they were going into this period, will come out of it much weaker. I think the Supreme Court has shown signs of life in the IEPA decision on tariffs. But for the most part, all of the allegedly non-political public institutions of the United States have kind of rolled over for Trump.
So Trump's strategic goal then, if I'm understanding you correctly, is sort of installing himself and his family, his successors in power. I think many people think of the revolution as being about norm breaking, about institutional weakening. I guess taking that next step to, his ultimate goal gives him some maybe more strategic thinking and planning than most people would give him credit for. But if the effects are institutional weakening, even if that's not the ultimate goal,
right,
what could possibly be an off-ramp to this weakening of institutions?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I think I think it's impossible to overstate just how primary a mover self-interest is in the current administration. And I think they sort of looked at the situation the first time they were in power and thought, wow, this would be a very lucrative business if you didn't care about norms. And the second time in power, they're thinking, yeah, I'm going to use the trappings, I'm going to use the institutions of government to enrich myself, my friends, and my family, and dare people to do something about it. And nobody has, right? And if you put yourself in Trump's shoes, which I know is a frightful prospect for a lot of people, here's a guy who had an election stolen from him. This is his view, not mine. Who survived an assassination attempt, two assassination attempts, actually, one very narrowly, who had the institutions of state weaponized against him by his opponents. They convicted him on all of these confected charges that describe behavior he and his cohort in New York, in the New York real estate business, have been engaged in for their entire careers. And he believes that if he loses control over the institutions of power, then the same thing's going to happen to him all over again. So this is a very existential, sometimes people make really bad decisions when they think that there's a hanging in the morning. But Trump, it seems to be when it brings out the most strategically savvy aspect of his character. And you can kind of laugh or look down your nose as much as you want about the guy. He's a two-term president in the United States, right? And at a certain point, the winning speaks for itself. And I think it's, in his view, he sees what he's done as the biggest political comeback in the history of the United States, and it's hard to argue with him.
Yeah, and I think he obviously has a base of popular support sufficient to have reelected him. The norm breaking and the institutional weakening that are the effects of this personal sort of quest, personal vendetta. Are we likely to see the grievances that have motivated his voters? Are any of these actions, is this revolution going to solve any of those grievances, or is it more likely to make them worse?
No, it's going to make them much worse. But if there's anything we've learned about grievance politics, is that there are always other grievances to move on to, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean that the movement built around those grievances is driven by the substance of the grievances themselves, rather than the kind of performative drama of being on one side versus another. I think it is an interesting open question right now whether the MAGA movement will stay with this kind of less peaceable Trump, if I could put it diplomatically, because I think people underappreciate the degree to which, well, you could say the same thing about the Democrats. Look, the two of the three people elected president since the Iraq War were two people who disagreed with the Iraq War and never voted for it. And I don't think that's an accident. And if you go back to if you look at his primary debates against the other leadership candidates in the 2016 period, that was his argument. It was like, how could you vote for these losers who agreed with George W. Bush, including his brother, to send all of your relatives to die in that shithole country, which is the way he would have put it at the time. And that was a core part of his constituency. There were a lot of people who lost family members in a pointless war. And he looked them all in the eyeballs and said, I would never do that to you. And I think if you look at J.D. Vance's performance in the debate last time, he picked that up, right? It was, I can't remember his phrase. It was actually quite silver-tongued. He said something like Donald Trump is a careful husband of the, yeah, kind
Sorry.
of nose
Taste.
wrinkle for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. A careful husband of the awesome power of the American military. Translation: I'm not going to send your son to die in a shithole country, or daughter. And that's a key part of his constituency. So I, for one, am interested. It's an eternal question whether what could Donald Trump do to alienate his MAGA base. But this is one worth watching, in my view.
Yeah, I think one of what has been so interesting in Trump 2.0 is the lack of challenge, lack of bravery, frankly, on the part of people that are not regular citizens, right? Like we've seen
Yeah.
ample bravery among the masses. If we look at Minneapolis, we had, before the interview, we're talking about a lot of the ways that the business community has complied in advance. But also you could say the same of Republican politicians too. At a certain extent, you can say the same of Democrats, right? Who could be a lot more full and forceful in their opposition. I think in the report you had listed like 40 kind of Democratic backsliding type events, and only 4 of them were effectively checked. And I think when we look at different spheres, I think a lot of this, well, you could ascribe different justifications for it, but I think you've seen no better example of this kind of behavior than in the world of tech specifically.
Oh, totally.
And the report talks a lot about AI and the risks of AI, and I want to get into that. But I also want to talk about social media specifically. There's no single risk that is centered on social media, but it's kind of a main character in a bunch. The report talks about social media in the context of socially dysfunctional business models, which I think is just such a great term, that threaten social and political stability. I'm curious, how do you see social media companies as generators of risk, of business risk, political risk, of this kind of moment that we're in?
It's a great question, and it gets to the heart. When I think of all of the things we have said since I've been at Eurasia Group, which is about 6 years now, that I thought would get us in more trouble, the one that I thought would get us in the most trouble is when we were telling people that the United States went from being with important caveats, especially if you're in Latin America or Africa, an exporter of democracy and its institutions, to the world's leading exporter of technology that undermines democracy. I thought we were going to get a lot more blowback than we did, but it turned out most people agree with us. And if anything, the countries that have been on the receiving end of that, especially in Europe and especially post-Trump's overtures, if I can put it that way, to Greenland, it shows that people actually agree with that. And I think that it's incontrovertible on the facts. And I think to get back to the point we were talking about earlier, this arch polarization that we see in the United States, I think it's unthinkable in a pre-social media age. At least you have to go back at least to the 1840s and 50s to find a United States that's this divided. And that even then it was in the aftermath of the invention of the telegraph, which created the popular press as we know it now. And I don't think those two things are accidents. I think that social media companies discovered very early that their business model was contingent upon creating friction between their users, and primarily and secondarily creating incentives for those users to self-organize in tribes. And they've done that very effectively. I think Meta's the most important example of it, remains the most important example of it in the United States and worldwide. But YouTube is an important example. And of course, you have the fitting term for it, the Ubermensch of it all, is Elon Musk's Twitter, which is intimately intertwined with the business interests of the whole tech sector. So when you see Elon Musk supporting Donald Trump, paying $250 million at least, that's the publicly reported figure, supporting the AFD, supporting Reform UK, this is self-interested business behavior. It's not like Elon Musk has deeply held beliefs. If he thought it would serve his commercial interests to be a communist, he probably would be.
Yeah, I think when we were talking about the kind of we were describing this moment as like a very cinematic moment where it
Yes.
feels like a lot of the things that we're talking about, all of these risks, they have direct references to pop culture, but to
Oh, yeah.
to Hollywood, right? And we talked about there's like this mobster kind of politics, but then also on the other side, it's like mobsters versus robots. Like we have
Yes.
all of these concerns around AI, and that is honestly, it's like what our news feels like is are the robots coming to get your jobs? Are they all of
Yeah.
these different things? In the report, you talk about kind of equally cinematically talking about the risk of AI eating its users.
Yeah.
So the risk, I found this really interesting. The risk is it's related, but it's actually quite different from a lot of the risks that we hear talked about when it comes to AI. Like we talk a lot about, well, I don't know, environmental
Yeah.
concerns. We talk about, is there actually adequate supply to, or adequate demand to meet the supply of of these different tools. We also talk about job displacement.
Yeah.
But the report really focuses on and forecasts the enshittification of AI
Yes,
tools.
indeed.
And can you explain what this means and kind of what we're getting wrong when we talk about the risks of AI?
Sure. I think it's, if you think at a very high level, AI is sort of putting a digital skin on every real thing in the world and then charging people to penetrate the membrane to access it, right? That's what AI companies are doing. And the argument that the digital replication of reality is more compelling, beautiful, uh, worth instilling with your values than reality itself, I think is a claim that will not bear fruit over time. But the novelty of it all will, of course, make people attracted to it in the short term. Uh, but they'll be left, as Cory Doctorow, we should give our fellow Canadian shout out here because he was the person who coined the term enshittification, which is kind of the term of the decade in my view, because it's like looking at the difference between the Mona Lisa and a crappy AI rendition of it. It may be awesome that the AI rendition is deliverable to your desktop, but it's not the real thing. And sooner or later, people's sense of alienation from reality catches up to them. And this is not a new thought, right? Like people were writing this about photography in the 19th century. And I think the difference, of course, now between the advent of that novel technology and this one is the amount of the economy that's devoted, or at least betting on the success of this new technology and its ubiquity. I mean, it's absolutely everywhere. I have two kids, as you know, Kyla, one is about to not be a teenager. He'll be 20, and my daughter is 18. They're both university students. And I ask them all the time, like, what do kids think of AI? And they see it as a tool. They're not having an ideological discussion about whether it's good or not. It's just a thing.
Mhm.
And I think that over time that will become prevailing conventional wisdom. But for the time being, the real challenge is that it's all of the dynamics we've been discussing for the whole podcast get harder and more protracted, and that makes it difficult to have a rational politics if 80% of what people are consuming every day is some form of fabricated reality.
Yeah, well, this delta between like personal use, personal consumption, and then concerns about
Yeah.
the broader the tools or whether it's AI or social media, like this is kind of one of my public opinion sort of obsessions is
Mhm.
we do see this very significant degree of concern around AI, what it will do to our economy, what it will do to jobs. Same with social media, like tremendous amount of concern about um, mental health impacts, what it's doing to young people's minds and body image and all these different things,
Yeah.
and a high degree of concern about misinformation. Yet we use it, but government has been extremely slow to if they're still glacially slow to adapt in terms of regulations, and it just feels like we are kind of living in this world that sort of just happens to us. Like no one is
Yes.
asking someone if they are bought into um, AI controlling the way that we think, social media reforming our relationships, all of these kinds of things, and it just feels like this world where people sort of don't have autonomy, or we and maybe that has always kind of been the case, but it just feels like the pace of that change is so rapid. And I'm I guess curious your thoughts on that, but also are we like I don't think our politics ready to kind of deal with that situation. I think we're already kind of seeing this sentiment around Brexit, around Trump. Like people, there is a political response to a feeling of lack of autonomy, and this is kind of part of that.
Yeah, look, I think you hit the nail on the head as usual. If there's anything that is producing alienation, what my generation would have called alienation amongst people under 40, I think that's it in a nutshell. And my wife has a very good perspective on this. She's a lawyer by training and a governance expert. She kind of teaches boards how to be boards. And her point, she thinks that all of these claims that AI is too complex to govern is advocacy data from the companies themselves, that we govern all kinds of things that are super complex, like cancer medication, for instance, and automobiles and air traffic. And we're choosing not to govern AI because the interests behind it have so much goddamn money and they're so powerful. And if you put yourself in the shoes of someone my age, I'm 54 years old, I think, most of my professional life, at least 2/3 of my professional life is probably behind me. AI is not going to shape or at least dominate the rest of my professional life the way it will yours or yours. And if you put yourself in the shoes of a young voter who's hearing political parties say, yeah, I know this really bothers you and it kind of sucks, but it's too complicated, we can't do anything about it, then they're going to invent other political options. And I think that's the real risk for the traditional parties all over the world, in Canada and the United States, is if everyone is seen to be too beholden to the people who are financially benefiting from the advent of this aggressive new technology, with very little concern for the people who have been paying the price of its dissemination, then they're gonna end up being they're going to have a lot of political problems, probably more sooner than they think.
So thinking of the kind of disruption that AI will cause to people, it's kind of your focus in the report was, the enshittification of AI eating its users. Not as much focus on the labor market disruptions that seem to be one of the most prominent risks that that people are talking about. The way I sort of think about it historically is, many people sort of pinpoint the roots of the populist upsurge as being deindustrialization and the dislocation of people in the industrial heartland, massive job loss, and as I think about the potential economic disruption of AI, I think about a new class of workers who will experience this sort of imminent dislocation, imminent disruption. I mean, on the one hand, it's thousands and thousands of truck drivers, for example, but also white collar workers, especially at the entry levels, but white collar workers who had been winning under the kind of the modern contemporary economy, and winning pretty big, right? Coders, engineers. Is AI going to create this new form of dislocation that just keeps us going down this road of people feeling left behind?
Well, I think you're zooming in, or as the management consultants would say, double clicking on one of the
No,
one
I'm
of the.
offended,
This is
Jerry.
What?
this is a management consultant free zone.
I'm an academic, I'm a PhD.
You're
not an
zooming into
MBA.
one of the pixels of a bigger issue here, and I think it's actually a really interesting question. So there's a technical and boring answer for why we didn't put that in as a risk, and that is that in our top risks report, we're really just looking at the year ahead.
Okay.
So we're describing things we think are proximate, that have a material chance of happening in the next year, and I don't see that happening in, or at least its materiality to be concentrated in 2026, to be blunt. But the spirit of the question you're asking is much more interesting than that, which is, you have to ask yourself, is there something particular about AI as a technology, as a force of mechanization, that will be unusually aggressive in creating labor dislocation? And I often post this on my own social feeds whenever this topic comes up. I think the grandparent of all of these trends is the mechanization of the United States farm sector. So in 1830, 1825, 95% of employed Americans were employed growing, harvesting, or processing food. That's what the country did for a living. And by the end of the century, it was something like 15%, maybe even smaller. I can send you the chart. Do I think that AI will have that kind of impact on the labor force? I don't. I don't think it will be anywhere near. I think it'll be closer to the automation of assembly lines. I think it'll be closer to the robotification, and of course it's intimately related to the robotification of the logistics business and the manufacturing industry. I don't think we're headed, at least in the short term, toward Wall-E, right? Like we're not all going to be orbiting, barely able to leave our chairs, and being kind of put to sleep by soothing technology. That's not quite where we are. And I understand why people are afraid of that. And I can see glimmers of it. And I don't want to be dismissive of it. But I just don't think that the facts back up that's where we're going.
Thank you. So I want to pivot a little bit. Kyla mentioned that in our, as we were kind of chatting at the beginning of the podcast, the two of us, we were thinking through these sort of cinematic analogies to the times that we live in, and the sort of mob boss Godfather framing of our loaded question this week. I think the risk that probably aligns best with that is what you call state capitalism with American characteristics.
Yes.
Which I think is a great formulation. I'll spit some numbers at you just to kind of ground us. The United States taken nearly $10 billion in ownership stakes in tech and mineral companies, taking 15 to 25% of foreign microchip revenue from companies like NVIDIA, AMD, $90 million in settlements paid by media companies to Trump himself. With the executive branch running this kind of protection racket, how do the businesses that you advise balance, I guess, their individual need to avoid being targeted with what we're thinking of as kind of a collective interest in putting the brakes on this breakdown in like market forces, right, that have made the U.S. a dynamic economy?
Well, I don't think this is particular to the United States, but people who are looking for business leaders to, stop autocratic backsliding, it doesn't happen. It never happens anywhere. It didn't happen in Germany in the 1930s. It's not happening in the United States now. It certainly didn't happen in Russia. It certainly is not going to happen in China, because to a certain degree. And I read a great piece about this by a young writer named Jasmine Sun, who writes extensively about. She writes about Silicon Valley
Yeah.
and the politics and geopolitics of technology. Her Substack is definitely worth checking out.
For sure.
You know, she's got a great piece on the latest example of what you're describing, which is the fight, of course, between the Pentagon and Anthropic.
Hmm.
And her point is that there's been this prevailing conventional wisdom in Silicon Valley that they're so powerful that they can buy politics, right? They're kind of above politics. And Musk's acquisition of the Trump landscape, if I can put it that way, is a great comfort to people in the tech sector that they're somehow above politics in the if you assume that we're talking about a food chain driven by financial gain and commerce, that they're somehow at the apex of it. And her point is that's not the way this works. Right? At the end of the day, state power is way more important than financial power. And if you get those two things confused, that's how you end up like Jack Ma in China.
Hmm.
And it's how Elon Musk almost ended up like Jack Ma a year ago, and he had to go out of his way to make up with Trump in the aftermath of the disaster that was Doge.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, I've seen this from, if I can be diplomatic about it, I've seen this from business people, both in my own time in the private sector, but also in the public sector, that they don't really understand how power works in the conventional sense of the term. And they think it can be acquired on the open market, when the truth is it has to be accumulated and then used. And it's the US government is still the most powerful single institution in the world by far. And the Trumps have done a very good job of converting that institutional power into personal currency, right?
Yep.
And anybody who thinks otherwise is taking a very, very big risk.
So from that standpoint of risk, then what I'm hearing is that maybe the sort of individually economically rational priority is to not be picked as a loser in the picking of winners and losers.
Yep.
But is the business community thinking about how they might organize collectively, pool some of that power to prevent anti-market forces from consolidating? Maybe it's a fool's errand, but is there some push?
Are you asking if they're trying to be middle powers altogether?
Yeah, exactly.
That's very funny, Kyla. No, I don't think they are. And I think that they don't. This is kind of my point. That's not the way they think about power.
Yeah.
Right. They think that for the most part, Trump will be president for a while and then he'll be gone and there'll be a whole other personality with a bunch of idiosyncrasies that I have to deal with. But at the end of the day, I run a Fortune 500 company and I've got my own stuff to worry about. They're still in the mood of the first Trump term, which is just, let's point the eye of Sauron at someone else and I'll go about my business.
But in the report, you also identify a big risk that follows from that, which is what you call a bipartisan ratchet.
100%.
So once the norms and practices are established, it'll be tempting for a Democratic president to continue down this road, maybe different priorities, antitrust, energy transition, empowering labor, are these sort of incumbent, the big businesses, are they planning for that potential?
I think they're worried about it, but they think they can buy their way out of it. And it's, especially for Canadians, it's hard to overstate just how the differential value of the variable money in the United States versus Canada. You know, as Kyla knows, I ran the longest campaign in Canadian history in 2015. It was 78 days long, and it cost $42 million. That's what we spent, all sources. And
Man.
you couldn't win the Florida primary for either major party with that money. And last time, I think that the official spend on the presidential campaigns was $3 billion. And that means that, sure, there are a lot of billionaires, and there are certainly more billionaires than there used to be in the United States. But in the aftermath of the Citizens United decision by the Supreme Court, you just see contributions to the political process go vertical from
Right.
the billionaire class. And there's a direct relationship between that and the kinds of policies that you're describing. So I think the more so than at any time since the Gilded Age, the United States political system is for sale.
I think we should probably turn to Kuzma, since
Sure.
we're a Canadian podcast, or what you call in the report the zombie USMCA
Zombie Kuzma.
risk.
Yes, yeah.
Jerry, you were very closely involved in negotiating Kuzma and dealing with the first term trade threats from inside the PMO. With the benefit of hindsight and your current kind of vantage point, which is a bit different at Eurasia, is there anything you'd advise differently about that first negotiation?
No, not really. I think I don't want to sound like I'm breaking our arms, patting ourselves on the back, but I think we did a pretty good job. At the end of the day, I used to joke about this internally, that never have so many people work so hard to make nothing happen, which is kind of what we were doing, right? We had a strategic assessment going into the negotiations, which we developed after long consultations from affected sectors, which in the Canadian context is everybody, that people thought NAFTA was working for the Canadian economy. We shared that assessment. So our goal was to end up with an agreement that most closely resembled NAFTA. And not to bore your listeners, but one of the key attributes of that agreement was it had an independent third-party dispute resolution mechanism, which allowed the Mulroney government to sign on to it in the first place. And this is where it gets important, that the difference between what we were able to accomplish and I think what's in the realm of the possible now is I just don't see the Americans signing off on that. And if they do sign off on that, then they'll just not treat it seriously. They'll do what they're doing with the World Trade Organization, which is they won't abide by its rulings and they won't appoint adjudicators to make those rulings in the first place, which effectively grinds it to a halt. So what we mean, long-winded way to answer your direct question, sorry. What we mean by a zombie agreement is it will exist on paper. It just won't be very justiciable if anybody abrogates its terms.
Yeah, I feel like the renegotiation of NAFTA I think is such an underappreciated part of the Trudeau record, when like it pulled focus for a year, right? In large part, or two, yeah. Yeah, you're like, they're tattooed on my body. I remember. But yeah, just that, again, for nothing, something very substantial to come from it, but at the same time, nothing to come from it.
Yeah. What Kyla said.
I think maybe this is a good time then to talk about the role of the business community in Canada leading up to Kuzma negotiations, but also in navigating the disruption and rupture from the Trump administration. My sense, our sense, is that business leaders in Canada, like with infamous tweets from Toby Lutke at Shopify, seem to be, maybe this is a generalization, but more critical of kind of every little critique that Carney will make of Trump and the United States. And they're more critical of that than they seem to be of Trump himself. Do they just not get where the Canadian public is on wanting a more patriotic posture, and totally open to the idea that maybe they shouldn't even care where the Canadian public is?
Yeah, I think they're behaving in what they think is their own rational self-interest, which is their biggest market is the United States by far. and they therefore put a higher importance on maintaining unfettered access to that market than your average Canadian would. And I think that's always been the case. One of my first big political issues I remember experiencing working as a young person in politics was the American invasion of Iraq. And you would say, why would anybody in Queen's Park care about the American invasion of Iraq? It was like the biggest issue in Toronto for a long time. And the business community was organizing Iraq war marches on Queen's Park. And Ernie Eves, who was premier, showed up with like a jacket that had an American and Canadian flag, trying to encourage the Canadian government of the day to join the Iraq war. You got to have a backbone in moments like that in politics. And I think one of the proudest moments, certainly for me as a liberal, was when Chrétien said no to the Bush administration about going into that war. So I think I think that part of the problem in public discourse and the immediacy of social media, and I'm certainly not innocent of this, I've been off Twitter for a couple of years, but when I was on it, I certainly played this game, is that people feel like they need to, I don't know, it's like they need to dress up their public policy opinions with some sort of moral or emotional judgment. And maybe 25 years ago, the chairperson of the Royal Bank would have sounded like Toby Lutke. I hope not, but I think it's just the media, to quote a great Canadian, the medium is the message. And if you're going to be all day on Twitter commenting on things, you're going to sound like every other person on Twitter who's there all day commenting on things. And I think that Shopify and any Canadian business whose largest market is the US, it's perfectly understandable that they would like the Canadian government to make the Trump administration happy. It doesn't mean it's the right public policy for Canada. It also doesn't make them bad people to advocate for it. In my view, it's just a perfectly rational thing for them to be doing. I personally think it's wrong and short-sighted, but I can see where they're coming from.
How big of a risk is it for the business community to be offside of Canadians? Is that does it increase the risk of regulation?
It's a big question. I don't think the risk is in regulation, and sadly, the risk is you're getting onto one of my hobby horses that I failed miserably at promoting while I was in active politics. It's just the old joke about the Canadian economy is it's like five guys in a trench coat, right? Like it's the same 4 or 5 companies that own everything and run everything, and we have no competition in it. And that's why our productivity sucks, and it's why inflation is too high. And if you protect goods and services providers from market forces, then of course they're going to overcharge for things, and they're not going to make things as well as their competitors would force them to if they were subject to open competition. So I think that's the big problem in the Canadian business community. It's that if you're really annoyed at one company, again, I'm going to get myself in trouble for this. Kyla, you're going to have to buy me lunch after this, but I was challenging a friend the other day. I was like, okay, so you live in Ottawa. We live in Ottawa. You try and provide groceries for your family without shopping at a store owned by someone named Sobe or Weston. And good luck. Mm-hmm. Good luck. And I think that's not the way the economy should be. If we cared, if our main concern was really productivity, we would open our incumbent companies up to a lot more competition than we do, and that is certainly true in telecom.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll recommend the Hindenburg Marché. you might struggle.
Are you sure you
fully
know
feed
who
your
owns
family?
it?
Honestly, as I'm saying it, I'm like, I hope that this is correct. But regardless, good product. So,
Yes,
but yeah, no,
yes, we shop there all the time. I can almost see it from my house. It's like Sarah Palin.
Well, in the spirit of getting Jerry in trouble, let's talk about politics. um, I think, in the report, you outline the risk of a Europe that's under siege, and that lays out, this evolution that we're seeing really across the world, but in Europe specifically, obviously in the US, where mainstream parties are kind of out and populist parties are surging.
Mhm.
Canada feels like the outlier in this, in a way that feels like you should knock on wood at every possible moment. But we just elected or helped to get I would say the elite world's favorite elite elected in Canada.
Yeah.
How do you see Canada fitting into this wave of anti-elite sentiment and this hunger for disruptive politics? Like, I think it's possible that both things can be true, that you can elect Mark Carney and that some of those undercurrents still exist.
Oh, totally. I agree. And I think that populist politics has its own sort of flavor in every country where it exists. And I think in the United States, the flavor is it's anti-elite, but the elites are considered to be people who had access to superior education. They went to private schools, they go to Ivy League schools, et cetera, et cetera. Like, education has a negative connotation in the anti-elite movement in the way that in the United States, in a way that I just don't think it has in Canada. And I think that the conservatives make a lot of mistakes in national campaigns, in my experience, Kyla. And I think that the mistake that I remember it so clearly, one of the first events that the then candidate for leader of the party, Mark Carney, did was he went to a festival in Western Quebec, and it was during some form of hockey moment, and he wore his Connor McDavid Oilers jersey and got photographed drinking a beer. And I remember Michelle Rempel Garner like crapping all over this, how phony it was and blah, blah, blah. And I remember thinking to myself that they don't realize that that is actually Mark Carney. Like, here's a guy who grew up in a tiny place in the Northwest Territories, and then Edmonton, went to public school and got a hockey scholarship to go to Harvard. Like, that's a great story, and it's true, and it's who he is. And I think that that is a good example of the problems that the conservatives have when they try and import an American methodology on populism, holus bolus, into Canada, right? They assume that Carney's educational attainment would have the same downside for your average Canadian, when, frankly, as someone who grew up in a small town whose dad was a coal miner and my mom was a nurse in a coal mine, like, the advice that we got growing up was stay in school, get as much education as you can, and therefore you'll get the best job possible. And I think that that's roughly still the advice that most, with important exceptions, that most Canadian parents give their kids. So I just don't think it has the same resonance, or at least hasn't been. I shouldn't put it that way, because it definitely has resonance. And you could argue, and I've seen people make this argument, that the Trudeau campaign in 2015 was actually a populist campaign. It was based on income inequality for the most part. Our principal argument was that the middle class had been screwed over by globalization. And our real remedy for that was going to be the Canada Child Benefit, enhancements to the Canada Pension Plan, middle class tax cut, and raising taxes on the wealthiest 1% of people in the country. And that was why Justin Trudeau was handed a majority government. It was on the basis of that offering. So I just think it's different in every country. Do I worry that I think it's true in general? I don't have to say it specifically about the party that you and I belong to, Kyla. I think it's hard to stay in touch with regular people the longer you're in government. I sure know that I have a better grasp on what's going on amongst people in the country now than I did probably my last year in the prime minister's office, because I spend time with my friends who don't give a shit about politics, and my family who don't pay attention as much as we terminally political people do. And it gives you a perspective on things that's really hard to maintain in government.
Yeah, I feel like that disconnect in my the beginning of my career, when I was doing a lot of work in Ontario and in the political environment in Ontario, I feel like I would start every presentation with just a slide that just had like, not that I'm saying that politicians don't know the median household income, but we would just start with like median household income is this, and some really fundamental underlying attitudinal indicators about the struggle that people are facing, especially, in Kathleen Wynne's government. They were doing a lot around minimum wage and a lot of these really, also, I would say, pretty populist actions, economic actions. And it is, people, again, you kind of operate in your circles, and you hear from the business community more than anything, and that starts to kind of shape. So I feel like this is part of the joy of polling, I think.
And especially focus groups.
Yeah.
As you know, I'm a big fan of focus groups, and there's no substitute for watching people and the way they react, both to the proposals you put in front of them, the visuals you put in front of them, but also the way they react to each other. And there's no substitute for we can digitize and create the most successful data analytics program in the world, but there's no substitute for looking people in the eyeballs and trying to figure out what they think and why.
Yeah, I have the joy of having spent a small fortune on an American education in data science, and then came back and started a qualitative research company. So I was like, never mind. I want to hear from people.
You learned young, Kyla. You learned your mistakes very young.
I feel like there's nothing that official Ottawa loves more than a pivot and talking about a pivot.
Right.
I'm sure you've crafted one or two of them yourself in your political career, or tried to land a pivot. Do they work, and in what circumstances?
That's a good question. I think I've been involved with one that really worked, and that was the post-1999 election loss, Dalton McGuinty. And in that case, it was because Dalton decided, I remember I had this conversation with him because this was my first real experience with big league politics, and he conducted himself more flawlessly in the 2003 campaign than I think any leader in the history of Canadian politics in major campaigns, before or since. And I was at a ringside seat to it. I was just the guy who made no mistakes at all, and he executed everything better than it was remotely dreamed of. And I asked him at the end of it, where did that come from? Because needless to say, the knock on Dalton beforehand was that he was a wooden performer, and he didn't look comfortable in his own skin. And he was exactly how do you go from that to, Robert Kennedy and a light switch, which is what the first Robert Kennedy, not the current Robert Kennedy. And he said, I thought to myself when we got on the bus that at the end of the campaign, I was either going to be Premier of Ontario, or I was going to go home to Ottawa with Terry. And Terry still is his wife. And I was okay with either of those things. So I may as well say what I think. And I think that that's the secret, right? Like, the secret is, it may be that the Pierre Poilievre that we've seen for his entire 25 years in politics has been not the real Pierre Poilievre, and the Pierre Poilievre we're going to see now is the real Poilievre. And if that's the case, then I'd be very worried about his electoral fortunes. But I don't think that's what's happening. I think what's happening is they're deathly afraid of a near-term election because they're so far behind in the polls, and he's so far behind the prime minister, and therefore they're doing whatever it takes to make it difficult for the government to call an election. I don't think it's like that's the Occam's razor explanation for what's happening here.
Yeah, I'm curious. I think in politics it is such a mistake to think that the other side is stupid or to think that they are not making sound strategic decisions. So I really try to weigh it when I'm looking at it. And to a large extent, I think, of course, this is necessary for them, that this pivot, or he needs to show this other side to himself. He has such a deficit when it comes to leadership, perceptions of leadership for him versus the prime minister. And so, you can scoff at a change of strategy all you want, but it doesn't mean that it won't work, and it doesn't mean that it's not smart. And
that's totally true.
But I am curious, are they just also doing the fatal flaw in politics, which is fighting the last election? Or is this still necessary for him to kind of be showing this different side, to be looking more kind of like a statesman or a world leader?
I'm not so sure that both those things can be true simultaneously. I mean, I certainly agree with your overall point about, sometimes for circumstances that are beyond the scope of the tactic being deployed. And so far, I think this is a tactic. It's not a strategy, right? And can it work? Absolutely. Should his opponents take great pains not to underestimate him? Absolutely. I mean, Pierre Poilievre's accomplished a lot in politics, and he's a very skilled communicator. I watched his interview with Peter Mansbridge, and I thought that was pretty good politics, especially if you're concerned about the demographic he's most likely concerned about, which is the one you and I discuss frequently, Kyla. It's I think it can work, and it has worked in the past. I think that it worked for Stephen Harper. I think Stephen Harper was widely seen to be too extreme, too far right. 6 months before he was elected prime minister, people were talking about how the Conservatives needed a new leader. And then he was prime minister that following January. It can work. I think the through line that makes it work is some version of authenticity, though. Like, I think that why Mark Carney was successful last year is because he was his own, he was Mark Carney. Like, there was no, you remember this, there was no telling that guy to be something he's not, right? And not that anybody tried, at least more than once. But there's no telling Mark Carney that you need to be more like this person and less like that. Like, it's just not going to happen. It's more, he's a fully formed adult, and he knows what he thinks, and he knows who he is. Pierre Poilievre, the difference, I think, is, and it's a difference for, I think, everybody who spent their entire career in politics, is they've spent a goodly portion of their lives observing themselves as objects that are being consumed by other audiences, and therefore they start to think, maybe if I just tweak this here and tweak that there, and before you know it, you can see all of the you can see the gears turning whenever they're saying something. So I don't know, maybe I do think, to answer your question directly, in general it can work. We've seen examples of it working. Underestimating its probability of success is always done at your peril. In this specific instance, I think the only thing that will tell us whether it works or not is time. Because, as you know, politics is full of pressure. And I'm one who believes that who you really are comes out when you're put under pressure. And we'll see if Pierre Poilievre can maintain this new version of himself under pressure, or whether he reverts back to the type that he has reinforced continuously for 2.5 decades.
I think that's as great of a spot to leave it. And you've been so generous with your time. So thank you for being our third ever guest.
I'm happy to do it. Good luck with it all.
I got to ask the final question.
Oh, the final.
Yeah. We're trying to make this a thing every episode, but as a public service to our listeners, you allotted data comes across your desk, is there
Yeah.
is there one source of data or maybe of vibes on our political culture that you follow or read on a regular basis and you think our listeners should be paying attention to?
No, there's not. It really depends on the topic.
Mhm.
But I think in general, this is going to sound like such a cop out, and your listeners can't do this because they don't have their numbers. But the two best sources of kind of what's really happening out there for me are like my daughter and my sister.
Okay, so
Like,
talk to normal people is
yes,
what you're
both of
recommending.
them.
Suddenly your
hate
daughter's going to be like,
politics.
why are all of these political people trying to send
Yes.
me DMs on Instagram?
Yeah, both of them hate politics, and both of them have, and my wife too. They all just have extremely sensitive and accurate bullshit detectors.
Very
That's kind
good.
of like the mom test, right? Like everyone
Yes.
has
Yeah,
their person. Yeah, no, that's sage advice.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Jerry. You've given us so much to think about, and you've been really generous with your time.
Oh, it's a
This is
pleasure.
great.
It's time for random sample. Gabe, what have you got?
Well, I'm in the UK for my random sample this week. On our first episode with David Hurley and today with Jerry, we talked a bit about how traditional center-right and center-left parties are being squeezed from the populist left and right. Of course, in the UK earlier this week, the Gorton and Denton by-election happened. It's a constituency near Manchester. And it's an illustration of that squeeze, a pretty clear one. Keir Starmer's Labour government had taken that seat with over 50% of the vote in the last election in 2024. But in this by-election, they came in third here behind the winners, the Green Party at 41% and Reform at 29%. A friend on a group chat called this Starmer's St. Paul's, referring to the Trudeau-led Liberals' Toronto by-election loss back in June of 24. And then, just a couple days ago, YouGov and Sky News reported their latest tracking poll results that has the Greens in second place nationally, which is pretty incredible. The top line numbers there, Reform at 23% in the lead, the Greens at 21%, Labour only 16%, Conservatives also at 16%, and the poor old Lib Dems at 14%. So Reform and the Greens now the two leading parties. Look, it's possible this is just an artifact of publicity from the by-election. Maybe there's some of that wasted vote stigma that's falling away. But in my view, this collapse of the center left and center right, especially in the UK, is definitely a trend. The 2024 election saw a historic low in the two-party vote share, just over 50%. So that's the vote share that that Labour and the Conservatives get. Just over 50%, about 57%. In 2019, the two-party vote share was 76%. In 2017, it was 82%. If you put a lot of trust in this YouGov poll, this latest YouGov poll, the two-party vote share would be 32%. Obviously a historic low. So definitely the center left and center right getting squeezed by populist right Reform and populist left Greens. Canada, very, very, very different story, obviously. But this continued squeeze is definitely something that I am watching. What about you?
Yeah, I'm also keeping my focus outside of the country. I'm looking to the US with a recent piece by G. Elliott Morris on Substack. If you're not already reading his work, you should. Like if you have made it this far in a political podcast about data, you really have to be familiar with G. Elliott Morris. But I'm actually going to start with a Chapel Roan quote. In the lead up to the presidential election, the last presidential, she got some flack for saying, "I have so many issues with our government in every way. There are so many things that I would want to change, so I don't feel pressured to endorse someone. There's problems on both sides, which people took to see or heard that as kind of like an equating of Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. And I thought it was really interesting at the time because it felt actually pretty emblematic of how a lot of voters, particularly a lot of young voters, feel, where they just don't like the options that they have. Obviously, in a two-party system, you're a lot more vulnerable to that. But I thought it was actually, she was sort of the voice of her generation in that moment. It felt very, very Gen Z. But in this G. Elliot Morris piece, he lays out some of the why, and spoiler, a lot of it is kind of vibes, not necessarily policy, as it very often is. The most common view of the Republican Party is that they're tough, but also extreme, cruel, and shockingly, this was a very interesting point, that they are elitist. 57% said that describes the party, so maybe it's some of that like relationship with, corporations or with the mega rich in the U.S. that is creating that feeling, but that's usually how we would kind of think of the Democratic Party. But on the flip side, Democrats are viewed as, yes, empathetic and principled, but also weak and ineffective. The concern is far less about some type of ideological test. It's less about them being a leftist, or them being too left or being too moderate. It is about being a fighter. And ironically, I think about this a lot as a pollster. Do we spend too much time thinking of the exact right word or position and not enough time thinking of how to, speak with your full chest, as the kids would say? And I think especially in the American context, I think that's often the case, like where people are too in their heads, and sometimes you have to just, if you're trying to persuade someone, try and persuade, say it with some force.
Excellent. Well, that's our show for this week. A huge thanks to Jerry Butts for joining us in the lab. We also want to send our thanks to our future sponsors for helping keep this show free for you, and to you, our listeners, our lab rats.
Did you just name the fandom on your own?
Yes, the vast fandom. You know what? I did. It feels right. Kyla, where can current and future lab rats find you?
All right. Well, they can find me at Ronellenfitsch on all of the social mediums, and Relay with Kyla Ronellenfitsch on Substack.
And I'm at Gabe Roche on all of the platforms. We will see you again next week.
Welcome to the Culture Lab.